Have you ever realized that sometimes what brings a narcissist to their knees isn't a fiery confrontation, but a moment of silence? That split second when you walk away without saying a word. No more trying to explain, no arguing right or wrong, no desperate need to be understood or to hold on. Just one quiet step away. And everything they built, the illusions, the power games, the carefully constructed mask of manipulation, begins to crumble in the silence. That's the moment we're going to explore today, the moment a super empath walks away, not because they've run out of love, but because they've finally awakened. They no longer believe that love can save a soul that doesn't want to be saved. They've stopped hoping that compassion can change someone who thrives on control and manipulation. They walk away not out of weakness, but because they finally understand that true strength isn't clinging to someone at all costs, but knowing when to let go, because you deserve more. Super empath, those deeply sensitive, profoundly sincere souls, once saw potential in the narcissist. They believed that behind the mask was a heart waiting to be revived. But over time, they began to see the truth. What they thought were wounds needing healing were actually sophisticated tactics of control. What they mistook for empathy was simply a mirror, a reflection the narcissist used to sustain the illusion of a self that never really existed. And when the super empath opens their eyes, everything changes. They stop reacting. They stop getting pulled into the fake emotional storms. And to the narcissist who survives by manipulating others' emotions, this is the true collapse. Not the loss of a lover, but the loss of control. Not being left behind, but being stripped of the mirror that once reflected a false and glorified image of themselves. What breaks the narcissist isn't the presence of the super empath, it's their absence, complete, calm, and final, when the one they use to control no longer reacts, no longer hurts, no longer rages. The narcissist is no longer the center of that person's universe. And that is the harshest sentence imaginable for a fragile ego built on the gaze of others. If you've ever been in a relationship that made you doubt yourself, if you've ever loved someone who made you feel small, or if you're standing at the edge, torn between holding on and letting go, this video is for you. This is more than a message, it's a journey. From awakening to freedom, from empathy to liberation, from silence to power. And if you stay until the end, you'll understand why narcissists don't fear being hated. They don't fear confrontation. They fear just one thing, that you'll leave and never need them again. Before we can truly grasp the impact of the moment a super empath walks away, we need to understand the two opposing forces that create the emotional storm of this relationship, the super empath and the narcissist. Two seemingly opposite personalities, yet magnetically drawn together in a haunting dance of hope and manipulation. So, who is the super empath? They are not just sensitive individuals. They are souls guided by a powerful moral compass, equipped with sharp intuition and the uncanny ability to feel others' pain as if it were their own. They don't simply understand emotions, they dissolve into them, to the point where the line between me and you begins to blur. Super empaths often grow up in environments that demanded high emotional adaptability, places where they had to read the room, anticipate someone's anger, and maintain peace at all costs. They developed the ability to sense without being told, and carried this gift into adulthood relationships, not just as a strength, but as a double-edged sword. In contrast, the narcissist is an empty psychological structure hidden beneath a glittering mask. They lack a stable internal sense of self, so they construct an external image they fight to maintain at any cost. They live off admiration, feedback, and affirmation from others, what psychologists call narcissistic supply, and the easiest person to provide that steady flow of emotional fuel? The super empath. Super empaths see what others don't, or rather, they want to see what no one else dares to believe. They see the pain behind the arrogance, the wounds behind the controlling behaviors, and they believe that love, if deep and sincere enough, can heal the brokenness. What they don't know is that narcissists aren't seeking healing, They are seeking emotional power. The relationship between a super empath and a narcissist may at first feel like destiny. The narcissist brings charm, romance, and the intoxicating feeling of being uniquely chosen, a psychological high known as love bombing. The super empath, with their open heart, receives these gestures as promises of real love, but then the price begins to reveal itself. The narcissist gradually devalues, distorts, and dismantles the empath's identity. They use subtle words to make the empath question their own emotions. They twist reality with phrases like, "You're too sensitive," "I was just joking," "You're imagining things." This is gaslighting, a classic tool of the narcissist to control and foster dependency. And the super empath, with their innate goodness and longing for connection, initially responds with patience. They think that if they just love harder, wait longer, understand deeper, then the narcissist will change. But what they don't realize is this: the narcissist isn't seeking a mutual relationship, they are looking for a constant reflection, a mirror that feels deeply but never demands anything in return. In this dynamic, the super empath gives love, while the narcissist absorbs it like a bottomless pit. Every apology is bait to pull the empath back in, but never followed by real change. Every tear is part of the performance. Every return only strengthens the cycle of manipulation. This isn't love. This is emotional imprisonment by design. And then one day the super empath begins to wake up. They start to ask questions. They realize that love cannot coexist with the loss of self-worth. They begin to look back, not with the aching heart, but with the clear eyes of truth. And from there, the journey of liberation begins. Awakening doesn't arrive like a storm. It comes like a slow, steady rain, dripping into the mind, drop by drop, until the emotional ground, worn and weathered from enduring too much, finally breaks open. A super empath doesn't wake up one fine morning and declare, "I'm done." No. The journey unfolds slowly, painfully, but once it starts, it cannot be reversed. It all begins with a question. Not a question aimed at the narcissist, but one asked inwardly. Why does loving this person hurt so much? That's the first moment the super empath turns the lens inward, no longer viewing the other person through a filter of pity or hope, but beginning to see themselves reflected in the distorted mirror of that relationship. From one question comes a flood of doubt. The super empath begins comparing words with actions, promises with outcomes. They begin to notice that apologies don't come with real change, that moments of tenderness are used to cover wounds that never had a chance to heal, that the narcissist's displays of being hurt aren't true vulnerability, but calculated plays to regain sympathy. They begin to see, not just feel. And when a super empath starts observing with quiet logic instead of soft emotion, the mask begins to crack. The charm that once overwhelmed them now reveals itself as deliberate performance. The moments of deep connection are exposed as carefully staged emotional manipulation. What they once called love is suddenly unmasked as painful, lopsided dependency. This is when the true awakening begins. Awakening isn't just realizing that the other person is broken, it's realizing, I lost myself trying to save someone who didn't want to be saved. The super empath begins to remember who they were before the spiral of manipulation, someone with sharp intuition, deep compassion, healthy boundaries, and a worth that never needed outside validation. They don't become a new version of themselves. They return to the version they had abandoned. And as the memory of who they were becomes clearer, they feel something they never experienced in the relationship. Peace. No more needing to prove anything to the narcissist, no more striving to be better just to be worthy of a distorted love. They begin to let go, but not out of bitterness, out of clarity. It is that clarity that creates the quiet, undeniable power of an awakened super empath. They don't need to scream. They don't need to react. They don't need revenge. They just need to stop believing in something that was never real. And when that belief collapses, the narcissist's entire world begins to tremble. Because from the beginning, their power, only existed so long as someone still believed they were worthy of it. When the super empath awakens, it's not just the illusion that shatters. The entire manipulative system is unplugged. At last, the super empath understands love without boundaries isn't virtue, it's a form of self-betrayal. And staying in a toxic relationship isn't loyalty, it's unnecessary sacrifice for someone who has no intention of ever changing. They are not victims. They are living proof that awakening is possible. And from that moment on, the journey to true freedom finally begins. When a super empath awakens and walks away, what breaks isn't just a relationship, it's the psychological foundation the narcissist relied on to survive. To the outside world, it might look like just another breakup, but to the narcissist, it's an internal catastrophe, a collapse, not of love, but of the illusion they constructed to cover their inner emptiness. A narcissist doesn't fear abandonment in the traditional sense. They don't love, so they don't grieve the loss of love. But they live through the reflections of others. Losing someone like a super empath, someone who once saw them as a soul worth saving, means losing the only mirror that ever made them feel, I matter. When that mirror shatters, the first thing that rises is panic. The narcissist no longer has someone to read, to emotionally manipulate, to rewrite reality with. They don't know who they are without someone to control. And then comes the one thing they've never prepared for. They're left alone with themselves. In the narcissist's hollow inner world, loneliness isn't just a feeling, it's hell, because with no one left to reflect a polished image back to them, they are forced to look inward. And what they see is unbearable: deep insecurity, emotional immaturity, and a fractured identity with no real core. A narcissist doesn't have a true self. They have an image constructed from the reactions of others. When the super empath leaves, it's not just the loss of a person, it's the loss of their entire identity structure. Like a building propped up by external walls but no internal supports, when those walls fall, the whole structure crumbles. In a panic, the narcissist often rushes into a new relationship at lightning speed, but they're not seeking love. They are searching for a replacement mirror, someone to sustain the image they can no longer hold up on their own. But what they can't recreate is the depth the super empath brought. That kind of depth can't be faked, bought, or manipulated. And like an addict in withdrawal, they start to spiral, desperate for their lost supply. They're not addicted to you. They're addicted to the feeling you once gave them. The feeling of being admired, of being needed, of being seen as special. But now, no one is reflecting that anymore. And what's left in the mirror? A naked, hollow self, one that can't hold itself up. This is where the identity crisis begins. There's no one left to blame, no one left to manipulate, no one left to play the victim for. The narcissist doesn't even know what story to tell anymore, because the narrative collapsed when the one person who believed in it walked away. Worse yet, they don't even understand why you left. In their world, everything must be driven by competition, revenge, or jealousy. But you didn't leave for someone else. You left because you no longer wanted to stay, and that quiet certainty, that calm decision, drives them insane. Because if you're not angry, not heartbroken, not reacting, it means one thing: they no longer matter. And for a narcissist, there is nothing more terrifying than becoming irrelevant in the eyes of the person who once saw them as everything. That is the ultimate punishment. No drama, no confrontations, no speeches, just your silence. And that alone forces them to face their greatest fear. I am no longer anything in their mind. The fall of the narcissist doesn't come from a punch. It comes from a door closing silently. And when they realize that door will never open again, all the power they once thought they had evaporates in an instant. When a super empath walks away, they're not merely escaping a toxic relationship, they're leaving behind an old version of themselves. The version that believed love required unconditional sacrifice, that endurance equaled worthiness, that shrinking themselves was the price to keep someone by their side. And from the very moment they walk away, something extraordinary begins, the rebirth of the authentic self. For the first time in years, the super empath lives in silence without tension lurking underneath. No more tiptoeing, no more anticipating outbursts, no more bending themselves to be lovable. They begin to notice the little things. Like music playing in a quiet room, like a deep, uninterrupted sleep unshaken by controlling texts or nightmares fueled by criticism. This is more than external freedom. It's an inner cleansing. The super empath no longer needs to prove anything. They no longer seek validation that they are lovable. They've seen themselves clearly, fully, not through someone else's lens. And when they look back, they don't see a victim. They see a warrior, someone who loved with their whole heart, tried beyond reason, and finally chose to love themselves above all else. Not out of selfishness, but out of awakening, because true love never demands the sacrifice of your identity. The ascension of a super empath doesn't come through revenge. It comes through reclaiming emotional sovereignty. They no longer react to someone else's script. They choose. They respond from maturity, not from wounds. They set boundaries, not to push others away, but to protect the peace they fought so hard to reclaim. And then something beautiful happens. The super empath no longer fears silence. They no longer fear being misunderstood. They no longer bend over backward to explain themselves. They know now truth doesn't need universal approval. It just needs to be lived. In that sacred new space, they begin to grow. Dreams once suffocated now have room to breathe. Parts of themselves, buried beneath the role of healer, are allowed to flourish. They no longer orbit around someone else. They orbit around purpose, values, and inner truth. And as they live in that light, something invisible yet undeniable happens. They become the one version of themselves the narcissist feared most. Someone who cannot be manipulated. Someone who doesn't need to be loved to know they are worthy. Someone whose silence declares, I'm not staying to prove anything. I'm leaving because I've chosen myself. In the culture of narcissists, the withdrawal of a super empath is the cruelest punishment, because they don't know how to respond to it. They wait for a reaction, a breakdown, a return, to restart the game. But this time, the game is over, and the only one left on the stage is them facing an empty audience. Meanwhile, the super empath walks away carrying no hatred, only wisdom. Not to seek revenge, but to bring clarity into the next chapter of their life. And that is transcendence. No need to conquer anyone. Just the freedom of no longer being a prisoner to anyone, not even to the person they used to be. When a super empath walks away from a narcissist, the first thing the narcissist loses isn't love, it's control over the narrative. Narcissists live by scripts they craft for others, stories where they're the misunderstood genius, the unloved partner, the eternal victim. And within these scripts, the super empath is assigned distorted roles. Too sensitive, too needy, ungrateful, never satisfied. They don't care about truth. They only care that others believe the story they've created. As long as you're still explaining, reacting, or defending yourself, you're still acting in their script. But when you leave, silently, no dramatic goodbye, no explanations, no words of hate, you do something they never anticipated. You start rewriting the story on your own terms. That, more than anything, shatters their illusion, not because you expose them to the world, but because you stopped participating in the one they control. They can no longer control your memories, rewrite history with denial, or define you through vague, manipulative labels. You've stepped out of the book they once authored, and then something miraculous happens. You begin to retell the story with the truth you were once afraid to face. That wasn't love, that was manipulation. I was gaslit. I doubted my own intuition because lies were delivered in a soft voice. I wasn't crazy, I just lived too long inside a distorted reality. Even if this truth lives only in your heart, it's strong enough to free you from the final emotional chain. Truth doesn't have to be shouted to be real. It only needs to be lived, acknowledged, and honored by the one who survived it. It doesn't need an audience or validation to be powerful. And that's why it becomes the most powerful statement a super empath can make. I no longer let anyone else narrate my story. Meanwhile, the narcissist is left bewildered. They don't know how to continue the script. No one believes their complaints anymore. There's no one left to play the role of the heartless one who abandoned me. No one remains to argue, to justify, or to explain. There's only them, and the silence truth leaves behind. Their breakdown begins the moment you stop trying to be understood. The moment you stop needing to prove that you weren't the problem. The moment you choose inner clarity over outside approval. From that point on, the super empath is no longer the victim of the old narrative. They become the storyteller of a new chapter, one of awakening, dignity, and a light that walked through darkness without being extinguished. They no longer need recognition from the world. They only need one thing, the right to own their memories. If there's one thing a narcissist is never prepared to face, it's the indifference of the person who once loved them with all their heart. Because to a narcissist, every reaction, anger, tears, even begging, is a sign of power. Every time you respond, you confirm that they still exist in your mind, that you're still playing the game they set in motion. But when you stop reacting, when you don't reply to their messages, when you no longer care about their latest manipulation, when they try to provoke you and you simply turn away, as if they never mattered, then the real weapon is drawn, indifference. This is not the silent treatment, a tactic narcissists often use themselves to punish others emotionally. No, this kind of indifference isn't meant to hurt. It doesn't aim to control. It is the natural outcome of healing. You're not silent to punish. You're silent because there's nothing left to say. You're not walking away to cause pain. You're walking away because every emotional road has led to one truth. You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. Your indifference is living proof that you're no longer trapped in the role the narcissist created for you. You no longer need to win because you're no longer playing. You no longer need to be understood because you've come to understand yourself. You no longer need love from them because you've learned to love yourself deeply enough not to seek validation in the wrong place. And in that detachment, the narcissist begins to panic because in their world, emotions are tools of control. If you're angry, they win. If you're hurt, they win. If you try to explain, they still hold power. But when you are calm, when your silence treats them like they never existed, that is a psychological death to them. A narcissist doesn't know who they are without someone reflecting back the version they want to believe in. With no one left to hold the emotional reins, they come to the late and desperate realization that they haven't just lost you, they've lost the last mirror that made them feel like a complete person. In that moment, all their schemes fall apart. The attempts to make you jealous, the carefully curated social media posts, the veiled messages, the accidental run-ins, all of it falls into a void, because you're no longer looking in their direction. Your indifference casts them into the one darkness they've always feared, not hatred, but irrelevance. To no longer exist in someone's mind, to no longer be the center. And for a hollow ego like theirs, that isn't just painful, it's apocalyptic. But for you, indifference isn't an ending, it's a beginning. It's a sign that you've transcended, that you no longer live from your wounds, but from your wisdom. You're no longer staying to fight, because there's nothing left to prove. You're no longer shouting to be seen, because your silence has already said everything. Indifference is the pinnacle of freedom, and nothing causes a narcissist to crumble faster than realizing they no longer affect you in any way. The departure of a super empath is not merely a physical act. It is an inner rite of passage, the starting point of a rebirth. And like any true rebirth, it requires a death, not of the body, but of the wounded, dependent version of self that had forgotten its worth. During their time with the narcissist, the super empath wasn't just manipulated, they were spiritually eroded. They lost touch with their intuition, doubted their own emotions, and lived in a reality that was twisted by someone else's narrative. But even in that thick darkness, the seed of awareness was planted. As psychoanalyst Carl Jung once said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And indeed, the super empath is forced to confront their own internal shadows. The part that once believed love meant suffering, sacrifice, and saving others to feel worthy of being loved, they come to a profound realization. Love is not endless endurance. Love does not demand the abandonment of self, and in that moment, they lift their head, not to seek someone else's gaze for approval, but to finally look into the light within themselves, a light that had never disappeared, only been hidden beneath sweet lies. This awakening isn't painless. It comes with grief, with longing, and sometimes with guilt for letting go of someone they once tried so hard to save. But beyond all that, they begin to understand. I was not born to be someone's healer. I was born to be myself, authentic, whole, and free. They no longer define their worth by how much they are needed. They no longer see their identity through the lens of how they are loved. They begin entering a deeper inner dimension, where silence is no longer terrifying, but becomes a sacred space to reconnect with their true essence. This is where rebirth begins, not through applause from others, but through unshakable strength from within. No more battling to be seen, no more grasping for acceptance, just one person sitting among the ruins of who they used to be, starting to rebuild themselves with truth. When the super empath reaches this stage, they no longer speak of the narcissist. They no longer tell the old story with a trembling voice. They speak with calm eyes, like someone who has walked through the desert, once thirsting to the brink of death, but ultimately found the wellspring within their own soul. And that is true spiritual awakening. Not through religion or ritual, but through facing their own darkness, embracing it, and transcending it with the light of self-awareness. From that place, the super empath is no longer just a survivor. They become a guide, not through sermons, but through presence, through living truthfully, through refusing to compromise with anything false, by becoming living proof of this truth. You may have been shattered, but you can be reborn, more beautiful, stronger, and belonging to no one but yourself. Some people believe that to escape a toxic relationship, you need a miracle, a sudden turning point, someone better, a new opportunity, another set of arms to pull you out of the fire. But the truth is different. Freedom doesn't come from the outside, it comes from within. And the super empath, the one who once lived in doubt, in silent endurance, in the desperate belief that true love will be enough, finally comes to understand. No miracle is coming to save them. They are the miracle. Leaving isn't an escape. It's a conscious act, a clear decision that I will no longer stay to sacrifice, to suffer, to try to save a soul that doesn't want to be saved. That I choose to leave, not to run away from someone, but to return to myself. This is the essence of true freedom, not simply being free from control, but being free from the need for approval, free from defining your worth by someone else's emotions. You don't need the narcissist to admit they were wrong. You don't need remorse or repair or a public apology. You only need one thing, to stop living inside the story they wrote for you. And when you do that, you are no longer the one who was left behind. You become the one who walked out first. You step out of the game. You leave the stage. You take off the mask and walk toward the light, where you don't have to perform the role of someone good enough to be loved. You simply are, without condition. And that is the greatest victory. Not victory over them, but over the version of yourself that once forgot who you were. From this journey, you carry not just lessons, but power. Not the kind of power that punishes, but the quiet strength of someone who no longer depends on anyone else to exist. You don't need them to return. You don't need closure, because you are the ending you were once waiting for from someone else. And if you find yourself at that threshold, believe this. You don't need someone to come rescue you. You just need the courage to stand up, to walk out of the fire, with your heart still intact, not because you weren't burned, but because you learned how to walk through it without being consumed. You are the proof that a person can love deeply and still walk away completely, that empathy does not mean endless suffering, that letting go isn't failure, it's rebirth, and that freedom doesn't need a miracle. It just needs you